Before beginning construction of your aircraft, you want to take the time to read one of the most important resources, and that is the Construction Standards Guide. This was provided with your aircraft, and it's only about 30 pages, but it's 30 pages of the most important information you need about building. Many of your questions can be answered by simply taking the time to read through this. Of course, you can't spend too much time referring to the plans that came with your aircraft. While we make every attempt in these videos to provide accurate information, it is no substitute for the plans themselves. Plans do change over time. These videos cannot be a substitute, as we don't know what version of the plans you have. So use these videos just as a guide. If you're ever in doubt or you see a conflict between what the plans say and what you're watching in the video, of course your plans take precedence. It is your responsibility to follow the plans before assembling anything in your aircraft. Here are the components for the horizontal stabilizer. I have taken inventory and identified all of the parts against the plans. I'm using an 8-foot workbench, which is more than adequate, and will keep my plans nearby to ensure proper construction along the way. We are going to begin with the rear spar. Now that's the spar without any holes in it. The ones with the holes, that's the front spar. So I'm going to choose the rear spar, and our first step is to identify the up versus the down, or the top versus the bottom. And I have labeled mine with an arrow. Let's identify how to tell which is the up and the bottom, the top and the bottom, as it's not real obvious at first glance. Here we're looking at the edge of the spar, and notice the flanges. The flange that is closest to 90 degrees is our top. The other flange is something greater than 90, and of course that's the bottom. So we want to label the front side and the back side of the spar with an arrow towards the top so that we don't get confused while building the spar, because that angle is not easy to see unless you're looking down one of the ends like we're doing now. We also want to identify the doublers which we will use with the spar. There is a top and a bottom doubler, and the way to tell them apart is to also look at their angle. The angles will correspond with the angle we just looked at with the spar. In other words, we have one which is somewhat greater than 90 degrees, and then we have one that is very close to 90 degrees. And they will correspond with the top and the bottom when we use these. Our first step is to lay the spar with the flanges facing up. This is the rear spar. I also noticed that on the upper flange, I found that they marked it top, so that makes it even a little easier to remember to not get it switched around. Now, as we look at the pre-drilled holes and follow them all the way to the left and all the way to the right, we'll come to the end of the holes. And right at the end, I placed a mark 10 millimeters past the last hole. And then coming all the way to the right, did the same thing. At the very last hole, I went 10 millimeters past and put a vertical line. I also did exactly the same at the bottom at both ends. With those lines marked, we can now grab the doublers and place them exactly in their proper position. Now here's the top doubler, 75T2-1, and that will go in the top, and I'm simply going to put it right like this and line it up with the line. And the bottom doubler, 75T2-3, I will place at the bottom mark and line it up right with the mark. And if we look down at the other end, we will see that it is also matched up with our line. And so we have both of these doublers placed properly from left to right. They're basically centered on the spar. And now we can clamp them in place so that they don't move and are held very firmly into their corners. A spring clamp like this is more than adequate. And we have a couple of those at each end. Now we're going to turn the spar over and set it up on some blocks because we want to be able to drill from the back side through our pre-drilled holes. Now I have inverted it so the flanges point down and sitting on some 2x4s just to give it some room so the clamps don't rub on the table. Now all we have to do is drill through the pre-drilled holes on the back side of the spar and right into the doublers. Now these are number 40 size pre-drilled pilot holes, so I'm going to use my number 40 drill bit and just drill through these holes as guides. I'm going to start at the center and work in both directions and cleco with my silver cleco, as that is the proper size for the number 40 hole. And I would keep an extra clamp near the area you're going to drill so that the doubler doesn't wiggle or move away from where it's supposed to be located. I'm going to drill every other hole. I can come back later and drill the rest. I like to keep it clamped nice and tight so that there's no movement of the doubler underneath. You can cleco every third hole. You don't have to get every single hole or you'll run out of clecos pretty quick. And I will continue in both directions till I get down to the end. And there it is all finished, and I have drilled in between those clecos. Now I'm going to start on the lower edge, the lower doubler, and perform the same operation. Now the upper and the lower doublers are completed. Now I'm going to change my drill bit to a size 30, which is the right size for an A4 rivet, which is our final size. So in between each of those clecos, I will drill it out with a size 30, then insert my copper colored clecos, remove the silver ones, and drill those holes out to a size 30 so that all the holes will be size 30, which is the final size for these rivet lines. And now we have them all drilled out to size 30 and using our copper colored clecos. Now we're going to perform the same operation on the front spar. Now we have the front spar with the flanges faced up towards us. That's 75 T1-4. And a pair of doublers. Again, the doublers match the angles in the spar. Remember, the top of the spar is the 90 degrees and the bottom has an angle that's something greater. So once again, we have marked 10 millimeters past the last set of pre-drilled holes on both ends, and this will locate the doubler in its proper position. And once again, we will clamp these in place, turn the spar over and drill from the front side through the pre-drilled holes, starting at the center and going towards the ends, using our number 40 drill bit and silver clecos as we go. And now we're drilled out to size 40 on the upper and lower doublers. Now we'll take our number 30 drill bit and open those holes to their final size for an A4 rivet, and then replace the silver clecos with the copper clecos. And now we have it all drilled out to size 30. Now I have the front spar down on the table with the face upwards, and we're looking at the very end, and you'll notice the 3 pre-drilled holes. What we want to do is take a piece of L angle and measure off 100 millimeters. And then we want to cut this off because we want this piece to be 100 millimeters. I'll go ahead and do that. Then I'll clean this up with a file, make it nice. Now the next thing we want to do is to draw a line down the center of that piece. And what we're going to do is place that piece on the front of the spar. And then we want to clamp it in place, and we're going to look for our line through the pre-drilled holes. And when we get that set up properly, we can then go ahead and drill from the back into this. And we're going to have one of these on each end of the forward spar. Now we want to grab our stabilizer brackets, 75 T24. There's a pair of them, they're both identical, and they're both the same size. The preparation we need to do is to mark 35 millimeters up from the bottom, use your plans, down to the start of the radius. And we're going to make the mark a little bit opposite on both ones so that we end up with a left and a right. Make sure you view your plans. And we're going to trim this part off. Use your bandsaw and then clean up with a file so that there aren't any more teeth marks when you're done. Here's what they should look like. Our next step is to locate the exact center of our spar from left to right. You can run your tape measure and confirm that you've got the right spot. Another way to check is if you notice there was a pre-drilled hole on mine that was just exactly at the halfway point. But you should measure with your tape measure and confirm that you have found the exact center. What we want to do then is from that center, and check your plans for this, we need 2 lines that are 247 millimeters apart, and I've drawn one here and here. Or in other words, you can divide 247 in half and measure that distance. But both of these lines have to be centered on the spar and 247 millimeters apart. Take your time to get that accurate, and also when drawing these lines, make sure you use a square so that you can get a nice straight perpendicular line when doing that. The reason is we're going to mount our stabilizer attach brackets, and because these brackets need to fit the fuselage properly, we do need them spaced out pretty accurately within a millimeter or so for a good fit. Now that we have these two lines, let's look at the position of these brackets. Now make sure you have the front spar orientated correctly, so this is the bottom here, and we want to take our brackets and place them like this. Now we want this edge, which by the way has a curve to it, but we want this edge to be in line with these lines we drew. So the best thing to do is to take another square and line it up so that your square meets the line you drew, and that way you can slide your bracket up to it touches your square. Here's another view. Our square matches up with the line, and then our bracket, which has this curve to it, will sit flat on the spar and stop when it touches the square there. Now, we also want to make sure that this is perpendicular to the spar, so I'm also going to use a square, and we can use it in either direction, to also make sure that we have the bracket correctly positioned in that way. Once we have this set just the way we want, we can then clamp the bracket to the spar prior to drilling. Also, we want this top up here to be even with the radius. The plans call for 35 millimeters from this tip to the bottom edge. Okay, I have one bracket drilled and clecoed in place and showing how the second bracket is being prepared for drilling. I have the spar mounted up on blocks so it's off the surface of the table, and two clamps holding it nice and tight. Now prior to drilling this, I can do my final checks to make sure that the bracket is indeed perpendicular. Another way to check is to do your measurement across from outside to outside. You should get your 247 up here and down here, because that 247 is the distance we want when we're all done drilling. And then I can flip this over and drill through the pre-drilled holes. Also very important to make sure before you do any drilling that you have the spar oriented correctly. We want the brackets to hang over down over the bottom, and remember the bottom is the edge with the greater than 90-degree angle on it. The 90-degree angle is the top. We don't want to get these inverted. And then finally, we need to open up all of these holes to a size for an A5 rivet, which is our size 20 drill bit. And then we can replace these with the black clecos, which are the proper size for a number 20 size hole. When we're done with that, we can actually remove and set these brackets aside because they're going to be a little bit in our way as we continue to build up the stabilizer. Now we're going to take a look at the stabilizer's rear ribs. Now there are 4 of these. This is 75T1-3. There are 4 of them. 2 are left and 2 are right, which simply means the flanges have been made so that they point in opposite directions. Now the first thing we want to do is to identify the front versus the rear, because they look awfully similar. The front is a little bit shorter, so if you take your ruler and measure that flange, it will be a little bit shorter. So you want to make sure you label that, otherwise you will get it installed backwards. Mine even had a label across the front that originally said front, but that's how you tell. And then as far as up or down, the up is the flat side, so feel free to go ahead and label that also. And as we mentioned, there's a left and a right, which simply means that they are identical except for the directions of the flanges. One points one way and one points the other. Other than that, you will notice that the crimps line up. So that way you know you have the forward and the rear oriented the correct way. So we're going to put the front part into the front spar of the stabilizer, the one with the lightning holes in them. Now, of course, you want to make sure you get the top of the stabilizer up so that it matches the up. And we're simply going to insert them. Notice that they have 3 holes in them, and those 3 holes will match very nicely with the 3 holes in the spar. And here's what it looks like with the ribs clecoed in place. We're looking at the center of the front spar. Notice the flanges point towards the center. So when orienting the flanges, have them always point towards the center. And it's easy to find where they are supposed to be located because there will be 3 pre-drilled holes along the spar that match up perfectly with the front flange of the ribs. Now we will go get our rear spar and attach the back end of these ribs to the rear spar. Now the rear spar is going to be oriented up to match the front, and we're going to just set it in place even with the front spar, and we'll notice the pre-drilled holes also match up nicely with the rear flanges of the ribs, and we will cleco these in place. And now we're going to install the nose ribs. These are 75T1-2. There are 3 of these. And I've labeled up the flat part, down is down here. Now, there'll be 3 of these. The first one is going to be located along the pre-drilled holes just to the right side of the center hole. And the flange will be pointing to the left or to the pilot side. And I'll just cleco this in place. The other 2 will share locations with the outboard ribs. There are 2 tip ribs, 75T1-1. There's a left and a right. The flat part, of course, is the upward part, and one will go on the left and one will go on the right. And we're at the passenger side, and it will simply attach to the rear spar. Going right inside the flange. And then, if you'll notice up at the front, the strip we made needs to be trimmed in order for it to clear the curvature and the flutes that are in the way. So I'm simply going to trim this angle up so that it can fit inside nicely along the web of the rib. Notice how I trim the edge of the angle so that it fits nicely inside. Now, the next step we want to do is draw a line down the middle of this flange of the L and locate 3 rivet holes that will attach then to the web of the tip rib. I've marked 3 holes. The end holes are 10 millimeters from the ends and then 1 centered. I pilot drilled those 3 in the angle. Now our next task is to drill out every hole that we use to attach a rib or nose rib to its final size of A4, which is our number 30 drill bit. So we should only have copper colored clecos when we're all done drilling. And then at that point we are ready to add the skin. Before we can attach the skin, we first need to drill out the top flanges of the forward and rear spars. This is where the doubler is found underneath, and we need to drill through the pre-existing pilot holes in the spar flange into the doublers for their entire length. And I'm going to do this with a size 40 drill bit to keep them the same size as the pilot holes. And now we're going to place the skin on top of the skeleton and simply line up the pre-drilled holes and cleco in place with our silver clecos, starting at the rear spar. And the front of the skin is hanging over the edge of the table at this time. The skeleton is top side up. And we'll continue clecoing through all of the holes in the skeleton, about every 3rd or 4th hole. Notice I have set the skeleton on some blocks of 2x4. This is to keep the structure nice and straight and off of the ribs, which are curved on the bottom. The reason I'm doing this is we are about to now drill through all of the holes to their final size of A4, and we want the structure perfectly flat while drilling. Otherwise, anything that isn't flat, any twist in the structure, would be set while we drill. So we want to get it straight now and then drill. By using a level such as this is for setting the angle of a propeller, we can check how level it is at one end and then move it down to the middle and to the opposite end to make sure that there isn't a twist in the structure. If necessary, we can shim to move the structure up or down slightly to get this level all the way across. So now all holes get drilled out to a size 30, making room for an A4 rivet, and we will then re-cleco as we drill with the copper colored clecos. We have flipped the structure around, put our 2x4s on edge because we need to make sure that we clear the clecos. We do not want this sitting on the clecos, that would really damage our skin. And at this point we need to apply straps, at least 4 of them, going around the structure to bring the skin tight and allow us to cleco the top, or this is actually the bottom in this case.
At this time, we would like to drill through the 3 pilot holes we made earlier in the L angle attached to the end of the spar and into the tip rib at both ends of the stabilizer.
We obtained 4 straps that loop around the structure, and then we used a square beam. Now you could also use a straight piece of lumber underneath the straps to help pull the skin tight to the ribs. Our goal is to make sure we have a nice tight skin around each of the end ribs. Then we know we've pulled the skin tight. And then also notice the blocks we used under each ratchet. That's to prevent the straps from bending around the skin. And we pulled them tight, but not too tight. If you would first draw some lines, center lines, along the front and rear flange of the spars, we could then look for that line through the pre-drilled holes. And as those holes approach and cover that center line, we also know we have the skin pulled far enough. Looking down on the corners, we also want to make sure the skin is straight and doesn't have a twist diagonally. As we look at the center of the spar, after we have the skin strapped down, we can do a bit of a sanity check and use a pen and put a mark through a hole, and then lift up and take a look and confirm that the mark is in the center of that flange, or that we see the line that we drew down the center appear with those holes. When you are satisfied with the skin, you then should use a number 40 drill bit through the pre-drilled holes in the skin. I would start at the ribs and drill from the forward back, and then start at the front spar, and then at the front spar, starting at the center and working left and working right, and then to the rear spar at the center, working left and working right. Also, prior to drilling, you can confirm that the attach brackets fit through their respective holes without any problems. These will be riveted on, of course, when we do our final riveting, but they need to be able to sit nice and flat on the face of the spar and fit through the opening in the skin. At this point, we can go ahead and start drilling with our number 40. And don't forget the nose ribs also. There are 3 of them. Once the holes are drilled and clecos in place, we can remove the straps Our next task will be to drill out all the holes to their final size of A4 using your number 30 drill bit. Now this is the horizontal stabilizer rear bracket 75T2-1. The mark along the edge that needs to be cut out has been marked by Zenith. You can also check your plans. And we're going to make a rough cut with the snips. Now you could do this with a bandsaw, but we're going to try with the snips, making a rough cut, a couple of passes, and then with a file we can end up cleaning up the ragged edge that is made with the snips. And remember, we can hold these snips upside down to get a slightly different type of cut than you're used to. We want the part we don't want to peel away. It is a challenging cut, but by using the proper snip, depending which direction you're going, you can get it awfully close. Now, we will end up filing that to a smooth edge, but that has gotten the majority of what we need out of there. Very nice. We'll do the same to the other side. By making multiple passes, you can get the piece to curl away rather than trying to take too much at one time, in which case the curl becomes much too hard to make because of how wide it is. So thin cuts, multiple passes will get you where you want to go. And we'll clean that up with some buffing. Here's the rear bracket after we have trimmed away. Now, we can take more off later if we need to, because the elevator nose will be following this path. And if we leave it a little too tall, it may rub, but we can always take it off later and take some more material off if necessary. But the important thing is get rid of any teeth mark and polish this up. Now our next step is to take the bracket with the ears downward and then grab the center hinge bracket, and this is 75T2-7. There's a flange on it. And we're going to mount this up to the bracket. Now this second set of pre-drilled holes, now I have the tabs at the bottom, and we count over 1, 2, 3, the third set of pre-drilled holes. We want to hold our bracket up and cleco this in place so that it matches up with the holes. Like that. And this will be the location of the center bracket on that third set of holes. Now, our next step is to take the gusset, this is 75T2-8, and it's going to go right like that. Now the easiest way to locate this is to extend a line from this hole right here all the way across to this hole here. Let me take this apart and draw that line and show you. And there we go. I've drawn a line to connect the two together. I will cleco the horn back up in place. And now we have the perfect location. I'm going to use that line to locate the holes. And so it's important that this flange touch tightly against the hinge bracket and that you can see the line through these holes. So I'm going to clamp this in place and drill through those 3 holes. Then we're going to come back over here and catch these holes into the horn.
Utilizing a very long drill bit is an excellent way to get into some tight places while drilling. It's an alternative to using an angle drill.
And now we want to drill the holes. There are 4 holes along here into the hinge bracket itself. And I will reverse these clecos to make it a little easier to get to those holes. And there's our completed assembly. Now this fits up onto the stabilizer, so let's go put it in place and cleco it in place. Now I have the stabilizer upside down, and remember the mounting tabs go down, so they will go like this. Right in, all the holes are pre-drilled. Now the only holes that aren't drilled yet would be the holes that you made for the gusset. Those will have to be drilled all the way through and into the stabilizer. All of those holes need to be opened up to A5 size for A5 rivets, drill number size 20. Easiest way to drill this is when you've taken the spar apart for deburring. Notice also that the top and bottom holes of the hinge require AN3 bolts, so those will need to be drilled out to 3/16. The rest of them for A5 size rivets. It is time to disassemble and deburr all of the components. Apply your corrosion protection as desired, and then reassemble with the proper clecos, and we will begin the riveting of the skeleton first.
Be sure to deburr each and every hole, both sides.
Now we're going to begin riveting. I've assembled the front spar along with the ribs, and I've left the rear spar off at this time because in some places where we need to rivet the ribs onto the spar, we may have a little trouble getting our rivet gun, and I'm going to use the hand riveter for some of these locations in here because we have the nose rib up here and we can't always get from the front. So just a little easier to be able to flex these ribs in some cases where we need to get the handgun in. So I'm going to go ahead and rivet this up, and then I can attach the rear spar and continue riveting. And I will rivet this from the other side so that we don't have the interference of the flange as far as the gun getting in there. And don't forget that these attach brackets have to be A5. We'll do those shortly. And I will continue on down. Notice how I have clecoed along the spar to hold everything tight while I rivet. And when we get to here, I will use the hand riveter and rivet some from the back side where I can reach them much more easier. The gun just won't get in there with the flange. And there we have the front spar all riveted. Notice that we've riveted only the places the skin will not come in contact with. Obviously, we do not want to rivet any of the surface here because we'll save that for when the skin gets on. But everything else we have riveted in place. So now we'll go ahead and attach the rear spar. And we can reach most of these rivet locations with our pneumatic riveter. And then we'll take care of the mounting bracket a little bit later. Labels can be peeled off very easily by first applying some acetone to a rag or paper towel and then soaking it, and just wait a few moments, maybe just about 15 seconds or so, and then that should be enough to soften the glue, and it should come right off, and you can wipe up any excess afterwards. And the back spar is now riveted nicely. Now we'll come back to the attach bracket, and before riveting that, we want to put together the hinge and gusset as an assembly first. Now obviously this will go in this location right here, but it's best that we rivet this up first before riveting this and the bracket on. So I'll take care of these. These are all going to be A5, and generally speaking, it's best to put the head of the rivet on the thinner part. And remember, anytime you have trouble pulling a rivet with your air gun, be sure to use your hand riveter because it has a better chance of getting in and making a nice, good rivet by keeping the head flat against the surface. Sometimes your pneumatic rivet can't get into the corners as well as your hand riveter. And then we'll just cleco this up in place and rivet. Now I found it easier to rivet everything in place prior to putting up the hinge so that the hinge wasn't in the way. Just be sure to leave open the rivets that are necessary to do your final installation. And that's what it should look like when it's all done. Don't forget the 3/16 AN3 bolts at the top and the bottom. And we are now all ready to put the skins on. Now for preparing to install the skin for final riveting, we want the stabilizer upside down with the nose over the edge of our table, as we're going to install the skin differently than when we first installed it for drilling. Because of the brackets sticking up on both the front and the back, we need to make sure that our skin bottom is up so that we can get it nice and flat on the bottom of the skeleton and rivet that side first. Isn't that nice? Very nice. And from this point, we'll start the clecoing. We'll get this all clecoed up. I'm going to cleco every third hole so it's nice and tight, ribs and spars, prior to riveting. And we have it clecoed about every third hole. And when everything looks nice and is lined up, we can go ahead and rivet. I like to start from the center and work outward on both spars, and the ribs from one direction to the other. It just kind of helps spread the metal in one direction to keep everything nice and flat and wrinkle free. And when riveting is complete, we need to turn this over, and rivets such as the ones found next to the bracket, those I pulled with the hand riveter. With the stabilizer switched around, notice we're using a long piece of lumber to push the skin down while another person clecos. The lumber will help keep the skin bent evenly so we don't get any crinkles. But then it's easy to line up your pre-drilled holes, and we put in a cleco every third hole, every second to third hole, to hold it nice and tight. And now we can go put our rivets in and rivet. And we finished all of the rivets. Almost, let's not forget to capture the ones on the tip ribs. And now on to the elevator. Now we begin the elevator construction. Here are the parts we're going to use for its assembly. Take inventory and match all of the parts against your plans. Note there's only one long spar that's used in the construction of this elevator. One of our first steps is to identify some of these ribs. Now, there are 4 ribs used in the elevator. There's a left and a right, and by that you notice that the flanges point different directions. That's what we mean by left and right. And the top of the rib is the one with the holes. So I have labeled all my ribs with an arrow pointing to the top, and that's the flange with the holes. The other flange has no holes on them. Now, we have 2 left and 2 right. The difference is, and I'll pick up a left from both sides, is, whoops, here we go, is if you'll notice, one of the ribs has many more holes in it than the other one does. The set of ribs, there are 2 of them with the most holes, we're going to call those the inboard ribs. So I've marked that inboard. And that's because these will go closest to the middle of the elevators. So, we have a left and right set of inboard ribs, and a left and right set of what we call the middle ribs, the ones with the holes that are less frequent. And I've marked them all with the arrow that shows the top, the flange with the holes in them. The other thing we need to identify are the tip ribs. We have two of them. Now, there is a left and a right, and again, that simply means that the flange is built in opposite directions. One thing we need to determine is what is the top versus the bottom of the tip rib. The easiest way to do that is to draw a line between the tooling holes, the tiny little holes that were used in the fabrication of the rib, and draw a line through them. And you will notice that the line slants to one direction. The direction to which it slants is the top, and I have labeled the top. And I did that to both of them. So I'm simply doing that to identify the top. The spar 75T3-5 is symmetrical from top to bottom. So you choose a top and bottom and label it so that we don't switch in midstream. Holes have been pre-drilled on both flanges. Now we can mount our 4 ribs, 2 of them inboard, 2 of them in the middle, and then our 2 nose ribs to the main spar. And of course, keeping track of our arrows so we know the orientation being up in relationship to the spar also being up. And we're simply going to locate the pre-drilled holes along the spar to attach these with our silver clecos. Now let's verify our installation of the ribs and the spar, make sure we have everything just right. We have the spar oriented with its top up, and then each rib, the nose ribs and the other ribs, the arrows also indicate that we have them attached properly. And of course, at the center, we are using our inboard ribs that we labeled as inboard. Those are the ones with the many holes along the top flange. And also notice, we want our flanges to point outboard. So all flanges on all ribs that we install should point outboard. When we look at our middle ribs, they are also located so that the flanges point outboard. And our arrow showing that it's oriented up along with the spar and flange pointing outboard. Once these are all clecoed in place in their proper locations, we want to drill out those holes where they connect to the spar to their final size for an A4 rivet, which is our drill size 30, and then we can re-cleco them. In the left nose rib, we're going to insert a grommet for one of our cables to pass through. So we're going to use the tooling hole right here and open that up so that we can get a small grommet in there. Using a step bit in your drill allows you to get the size hole you want rather quickly.
We are now going to install the elevator rear skin. Look for the piece that has the cutout in the bottom, and then we want to flip it around so that it is on the bottom.
And then simply open it up and slide the ribs into it. Now this is all on just one side of the elevator. And we're simply going to match up the pre-drilled holes and align it to the spar on the top and the bottom. And we can actually cleco it into place. And there will be another half that goes on the other side. The cutout for the trim servo is on the very bottom and out of view at the moment. And then on the other side, we will slip the skin in, and it will overlap in the center section. Now we will flip the entire structure over . Notice that we're using a support under the spar and trailing edge to keep the clecos from touching the table surface. We don't want the weight of the elevator sitting on those clecos. We can now cleco through the pre-drilled holes the front edge of the skin to the spar. We can also cleco in place the tip rib 75T3-1. Now, the top of the rib is the one with the holes in the flange, so you really can't get these mixed up. And we'll just align the pre-drilled holes and cleco in place. And there will be one for each end of the elevator. Now, at each tip rib, we're going to clamp the front edge of the skin to the rib. This way, we can go ahead now and drill through the skin into the flange of the tip rib. We'll do this on both sides and cleco. Now we want to locate the bent strip 75T3-4. It's simply a L-shaped piece of angle. And what we want to do is on the large face, mark a line 10 millimeters in from the edge, and then 3 rivet locations 10 millimeters from each edge, and then one in the middle. Now what we're going to do with this is place it right in here. So we have the large piece against the spar and the shorter against the inside of our nose rib. Now I'm going to clamp this in place, and first I'm going to pre-drill 3 holes at the locations we marked, and then clamp this in place and drill into the spar. So with it clamped in place, I will then drill into the spar at those 3 locations. Now on the other side of this flange, which is the other side of the tip rib, we'll find pre-drilled holes which will allow us to drill right into the other flange. And there we've drilled through the pre-drilled holes into the other flange of the bent L. Now we're going to remove this rib completely from the elevator. Now we're going to take the hinge pin, 75T3-9. This is a steel part. And I've drawn a line down the center of it from one end to the other. I have taken the tip rib, enlarged the middle hole to a big 3/16, and what I'm going to do is from the back side push the pin into it. Spread the flanges a little bit. And then on the front, you're going to move the pin around until you can see that line you drew down the center through the holes. Put a block of wood behind this, put it on your table, and when you see the line, drill through those holes and cleco them. We want to then enlarge these holes for an A5 size rivet, and then we can remove the pin. This assembly will eventually go on the outside of the tip rib. But this is a great way to mark those holes accurately and drill them. And there we have it drilled out. Now because of the welding on the back side here, you may need to open up this hole larger, as we want this to sit nice and flat on the surface, and if there's any obstruction behind there, that will cause this to bow out a bit. So feel free to open that hole up to make room for that welding spot on the back there. Then of course we'll need to open up the 4 holes in the bent L when we replace this back on the elevator. Now we want to take a piece of our L angle and measure off 65 millimeters and cut a piece off. We actually want 2 pieces, each at 65 millimeters in length. It'll look about this size. And what we want to do is draw a line down the center of each piece. In fact, I'm going to draw a center line on the outside of the angle on both sides of each piece. Next, we want to take our elevator rear channel. This is 75T3-10. Now notice that the top flange is the one with the pre-drilled holes. The bottom flange has no holes. I did draw a center line down the middle of that flange. Now, what we want to do with the angles that we cut off, 65 millimeters, is to place them right on the edge until we can see the center line through the pre-drilled holes on the back side. When we can see those pre-drilled holes, we want to go ahead and drill and cleco, and there will be one of these at each end. It is always best to clamp things before drilling so that they do not move when you exert the pressure of your drill bit. In addition to looking for the pre-drilled holes, I'm also careful to center this from left to right so that it's centered in the middle of the channel before drilling. And I always use a piece of wood while drilling to back up and block the drill bit as it goes through the material. And here's what it would look like. Now, on each of the flanges, I have drawn the center line, of course, and marked 3 more rivet locations. The 2 ones from the end are 10 millimeters from the edge, and then 1 in the center. I've done that to both sides, and I'm going to pre-drill these locations with the number 40 pilot bit. And again, I can use my wooden block to make it very easy to drill. Now we want to install the rear channel. Now, I have my elevator facing down. In other words, this is the bottom. And remember, on our channel, the side with the holes is the top. So this needs to go in this way. And of course, I've drawn the center line as we discussed before. This will go inside this way. In order to insert it, we're going to insert it from the front up here. So I've unclecoed the spar enough to be able to lift it and put it in like this. And there are pre-drilled holes that will match the holes on the bottom of the channel with the skin. Put it in place. Now, it's just sitting in there. I'm going to turn the elevator over so that we can cleco it from the top where we have the holes already drilled. Now the channel and the holes are here, so I'll go ahead and cleco these in place to capture the top flange with its pre-drilled holes. With these now clecoed in place, I'm going to turn the elevator over again and drill through the pre-drilled holes in the skin and looking for the center line in the flange and drill into the top flange. Now we're looking at the bottom, and this is the row of holes that we're going to drill into the bottom channel. Now I'm only going to drill when I can see my pre-drilled line that we drew on the flange previously through there, and I can push and pull as necessary to see the line. We're also drilling through 2 sets of holes because this is where the skin overlaps. So be sure you cleco up here also to make sure the skins are overlapping precisely, and then look for the line, adjust the channel, and drill and cleco. Now our next step is to drill the small L brackets we attached earlier to the rear channel, and those can be found by looking way in here. A little hard to see with the camera, but you get the idea. The 3 holes on each side. We're going to use an angle drill to get those and simply drill through the pre-drill hole we made into the side of each of the ribs. Now, if your drill is small enough to get in there, you can also do that. Or use the right angle drill.